It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Nonprofits. This is a show where we discuss news and topics of the day from a skeptical humanist perspective. I'm one of your hosts, Laura, and today's topics are all about control. I am joined today with three very lovely hosts. I have Arden Hart, Richard Gilliver, and ex-Christian Erin. Hi, everybody. And this show, just as a reminder, is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. Today's topics, we are going to be talking about a mega church pastor caught with his pants down, looking back at a history of religious control by fire, church and state separation, and Aussie Chritian College faces backlash. As with all of our shows, a link of today's topics and the news we discuss are available in the description below. And if you want to come into the show prepared, you can always check them out on the Nonprofits Facebook fan page every Friday night for a list of the new articles. And that way you can read them ahead of time and follow along with us. So we are going to move right into segment one. And I have Erin, you're going to be introducing today's segment. So take it away.
Yes, I get to introduce the article today about the megachurch pastor who was caught with his pants down. The article today comes from the Daily Beast, and we have 41-year-old charismatic Pastor Taverner Smith, who is was a married gentleman with kids. He was recently caught having an affair with one of his church employees. So the people in his congregation obviously were really shocked by this. I don't think any of us are particularly shocked by this. The history of this relationship goes back a few years to 2020, where people started in his congregation started having some suspicions that something was going on with one of his female employees at the church. But in November, members from his church caught him and the other lady at his house in their undergarments. He quickly went to try to cover up and try to make an excuse for this, saying that they were cooking chili and that they had spilled the chili on their clothes. And that is why he was in his boxers and she was in a towel. Obviously, this is another case that we've seen many times happen in these mega churches. The response from his congregation is pretty split over this. Half of the congregation is kind of shocked, like this is out of nowhere. The other half feels obviously quite betrayed by this. I don't think any of us are very shocked by this. This gentleman was a prosperity gospel pastor, so he obviously had a history of kind of a position in his church where he would ask people for things that we think are pretty unethical, where they would ask for donations and be preaching a type of message that was high pressure, kind of highly emotional. He was known to give sermons based on his personal life, very, very just a very emotional kind of manipulative environment. So my first thought with this whole thing is that we could talk about power dynamics. There are power dynamics even in churches. It's very similar to the power dynamic with an employee-employer, but when you add a religious leader into the mix, they have the added structure of power where they claim to hear from God. Pastor Taverner was no different. He had claimed for many years that he was led into this position because he had heard directly from God. So anything that he kind of makes a decision to do in his church, he's going to have that added bit of control and power and authority over his congregation because he is hearing it from God. So I've seen this happen many times. I think we all have seen this happen. And I think it causes a lot of confusion in the congregation because they're obviously taught to forgive, and they're taught to make a bit of room for these mistakes. A lot of the excuses we hear come out of these situations are that someone is kind of a work in progress, or that they have, they have their own sins in their lives and that they are working on it. And so I think that it puts somebody in the congregation in a position where they are kind of forced to choose their ethics system over top of their spiritual system. And if they were to have an issue with his behavior, it might even be interpreted that they are having an issue with God, because like I mentioned earlier, that his authority comes from God. So it's a kind of a messy situation. Obviously, infidelity in that sort of situation is uncomfortable, even in a secular situation. But when it comes to these spiritual, do as I say but not as I do kind of situations, it can be really, really uncomfortable and confusing for the congregants. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my first reaction to this was honestly kind of like, if I'm being totally honest, was like, why is anyone surprised? I don't know. I don't know what other reaction to have to this. I feel like this seems so pervasive in that sort of situation. But I tried to tap into like younger me, who was kind of like maybe the first time I encountered one of those stories when I was still a religious person, and being like, oh my God, they don't hold themselves to the same standard they hold us all to. That's insane. And it is really sad and heartbreaking for those congregants. And I think more than anything for this staff, this female staff who is, I mean, I guess it's hard to say where the line of like abuse is there, but certainly a power dynamic was used to get her in compromising positions. I think that's really where the core of like my empathy and reaction to this situation comes from. But I'm trying to hold back the urge just to put like a shocked Pikachu meme and like leave it at that.
Yeah.
Well, and even if it wasn't an abuse of power, it's definitely an inappropriate relationship, workplace relationship, one way or another, because he was the head of this church. So he's in a position, especially being married, and she was married as well, where any situation like that is going to be inappropriate, especially for him. But I didn't get necessarily the impression that he was using power to sort of rule her in, or kind of get her under his wing. But I did get the impression that that they did it very openly. Almost, they were always hanging out together. She was always in his office. They worked together on stuff, and so there were a lot of rumors well before it was discovered. But I had the same reaction as you, Arden, of this is no big surprise. Why is this even newsworthy? I honestly think what makes it the most newsworthy when I think about it is the way the church can't necessarily absorb, like they're basically crumbling because their leader was caught doing something that his people have been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? Like it's no big new thing, especially among religious bodies. Like it's not something that they're immune to. But the church is literally like unable to recover from it. I think we had 3 different articles posted on this same story, and I didn't even really necessarily think it was newsworthy enough for one. I mean, certainly there's lots to talk about in the article, but it played out like a soap opera.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think going along the lines of all of you have said, I mean, there's lots of places we could take this article, because it's quite a funny story at its core, if not for the abuse of power. But it always seems, and I don't know whether you agree or disagree with this, that people who, in every single case when people claim that God is talking directly to them, they always do really well financially out of it. And
Strange.
we don't have any kind of financial records from the church because they don't have to declare it. But when the article goes into his financial background, and it tells us that property records show the building alone is worth 4.9 million. A child support worksheet in Smith's divorce proceedings lists his monthly income as $16,666. According to the divorce records, Smith and his ex-wife owned 3 houses in and around Chattanooga, worth $98 don't even know how to say that. It's such a huge figure. 981,330, and maintained a real estate investment account worth 20,000. So he's not doing bad out of God talking to him, is he? He's, he's certainly not one of these down and out preachers who's relying only on God's voice to sustain him.
You'd think you'd be more careful when you had that much riding on it. If you're teaching a certain sexual ethic to your congregation, to go and do something completely otherwise that would possibly risk that income, you'd think you would be a little bit more careful with that. But like you said, like the idea that they have this authority from God, a lot of these pastors seem like they think they're untouchable. And I think that they know enough tactics that they can kind of gaslight their congregants or anybody who is close enough to them, even the people that were very, very close and in that inner circle. I feel like the tactics that a lot of these people have to completely manipulate the onlookers too, so that properly kind of frame the situation. Like I had mentioned, like saying that it was I've heard people like I have a sexual sin, or everybody is a sinner. This has been my battle, or whatever. There's so much language around it that it's so easy to manipulate people into not being judgmental and to continue to support you. So that's the part that I think I'm more irritated by. Well, I mean, I am irritated by it all, but that's the part that I see is the saddest, besides the impact on his own family, the impact that it'll have on the people who follow him and who come to, or like view him as an authority figure. They're going to be susceptible to that manipulation as well. Yeah.
It does seem to be a story of kind of two halves to me, because it's clearly a manipulative person. Claiming he's got messages from God, and the article tells us he pretty much went on a recruitment drive to build this church up, and it was all about the money. So there's clearly manipulation there. I do think that regarding the relationship itself, it does seem to come across as something that's kind of blossomed naturally, rather than him specifically targeting somebody to manipulate into a relationship. And the article, this bit made me laugh in the article, where it said something about he started growing his hair out and getting piercings. And it and that's when the congregation noticed something was amiss. And I think it sounds to me like he's met this lady that've kind of it's reinvigorated him, and he's started like changing his appearance to try and, like, I don't know, put his alpha male feathers on.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really typical thing. Sorry, Laura. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say it just struck me as odd that those things are signs of his slipping, right? Like we see tattoos and piercings and long hair as being sinful, or losing their way, or losing his grip, or getting kind of out of touch. And to me, it's just an interesting. I don't know. It's sort of interesting that we classify people that way, right? Like, to me, piercings and tattoos and hairstyles are just another way of expressing yourself. They're not a sign of anything positive or negative. And it's interesting that the church, in hindsight, he's having an affair. Oh, well, there was that time where he started growing his hair out. Oh, and then he also got piercings. Oh, we should have seen the whole time, right?
Yeah. Like, it's not that he was like meeting alone with her in his office and all these other things, other behavioral changes. It's like, oh, he grew his hair out and got a few piercings. Like, that's the most Christian kind of way of framing it I've ever heard.
I think too, it's interesting to think about, kind of like, I know we've all maybe got more or less the same impression that he didn't like single this girl out, and it wasn't like a situation where it was like, oh, like God is telling me that you have to be with me or whatever. But there is still like a level of manipulation there too, because I mean, if this was happening openly in front of all of the congregants for a really long time and nobody's calling it out, clearly he has to be doing some sort of misdirection there, and I think, like you pointed out, Erin, like, if he's considered like a voice of God in the church, then of course they're going to be like, oh, well, he says nothing's happened. And, if he's the most holy of all of us, then we should just trust him that of course nothing bad is happening here. And it is it's really, really unfortunate. I am curious to know how the people who are still there are able to sit in those seats. And I would love to know what's going on in their minds. Like they have to be feeling some degree of like dissonance. I don't know how you couldn't be conflicted, especially when there were reports in the article that he was calling like those who left the church the enemy and things like that. It seems to be like almost like this ramped up like cultic language that he's getting into of like creating a more like dense in group and trying to like frame everything else as the enemy or a threat to their what they have.
Yeah, and of course he hasn't actually admitted to this yet,
Right.
according to the article. It's interesting that there is that kind of the split, because some of the congregation have left. Those who the article tells us thought there was something like a soap opera going off with photographs appearing of them eating in a restaurant together and things like that. And then there are this other side of the congregation who are standing by him and who are, as Arden said, calling the rest of them liars and saying that they kind of it's their fault for spreading these rumors. It's very interesting to me, and I'm also interested in the kind of the cognitive dissonance of those who've left, because it's not shaken their faith. It
Right.
seems to me from the article, it's this thing has happened, and they're not say it's in no way leading them to say that God doesn't exist, or maybe I've been following the wrong religion. They've put it down to this man who has fallen and he's sinned, and even worse than that, they're questioning themselves, saying, I let this go on. I'm bad for doing that. And I think that's really sad, and that they've kind of got this dissonance, that they've gone to another church now, they've gone to other churches rather than allowing themselves to question, well, is the faith as a whole wrong?
Yeah, so that's really more where I wanted to focus more than the affair itself, because like I said earlier, the affair just doesn't really strike me as that newsworthy, other than the fact that it's the contradiction of, oh, you must be so pure and you're a sinner if you do these things, but I'm gonna go ahead and do them anyway. Um, but other than that, it's not that newsworthy. But the manipulation of people, not just by pastors like him, but all church organizations, where they have this sense of community, where they manipulate people into, like, people will come in there and they'll change their lives for the better, and they'll attribute it to God, and now suddenly it's like what the community and the people in the church have done is manipulating people into these belief systems that get them stuck, right? So, like what Richard said, um, you have a person who says that he hears God and he's speaking for God, and he gets all these people in, and it's very charismatic, and he gets them all fired up, and then he does something wrong, and they're like, well, okay, time to leave to a new church. But they never question, well, was what he was teaching us even true to begin with? And one of the quotes that I wanted to talk about was really just like, how the system takes advantage of people, and how the system takes people when they're at their worst and sort of builds them up, and then makes them kind of dependent on it. And so one of the quotes from the article was, another former attendee broke down in tears, talking about how the church had helped her turn her life around and how lost she felt without it. Before she joined the venue, she said she drank, cursed, and was generally a mean person. Attending had helped her find her true self, she said, or at least she'd thought, and now she didn't know what to think, right? And so, I mean, it's good. There are some people who are actually questioning the belief system around it, but it's really sad to think that it's not just about helping people, it's about helping people and adding all this manipulation on top of it, to where when that rug is pulled out from underneath them, they have nowhere to go.
Yeah, there's I just see layer upon layer upon layer of manipulation, and manipulation to get them in the door, manipulation while they're there, manipulation when things go wrong. Just the very fact that there is anybody in the congregation who's taking any kind of blame for his behavior shows me that there's been abuse. Like that is a form of abuse, when somebody feels like they're in that position where they've done something wrong based on someone else's behavior. And then, yeah, manipulation on their way out. So if somebody leaves the church, or if somebody leaves the church or leaves the faith, they're going to get, fingers pointed at them of why they left, and they weren't supportive, they weren't forgiving. If they decide to, take those doubts a little further and question their belief, they're going to get told that they didn't have a theologically sound, view of faith, that they had a bad experience and that they just gave up on their faith. Like, it's just, the manipulation just continues over and over again, and it compounds on itself. And it's really, really hurtful to see. As somebody who's an ex-Christian, like I feel like I can sit in that mindset of exactly how those people are feeling, and feeling the intense dissonance, and trying to compartmentalize it, trying to see where how can I explain this, how can I maybe blame myself. There's many avenues on how they can cope with it, and most of them seem really unhealthy.
I hope that, like, going forward, people who are maybe they're consider themselves Christian, they just don't take it that seriously, or they're not like super strict on themselves, or maybe people who are more kind of ambiguous about this stuff, like, can see a story like this and look back on how frequent these things happen, and hopefully kind of try to integrate that into like the way they operate around Christians and Christianity in general. Because I think there really still is this like pervasive thing, at least in American culture, of like, if an adopted kid goes to a Christian home, it's a good home, or like Christianity is synonymous with goodness and good personness. And like, while I'm not going to act like there aren't good Christians out there, I think you can really see how that Christianity is like a system that is built to control your mind and make you think that these people are good and worth listening to and worth following, when in reality they don't live up to the same standards that they hold all of these people to. These people are giving 10% of their income because they're afraid that if they don't do that, they're not going to be successful, or God won't be happy with them, or maybe they're going to go to hell or something. And meanwhile, the people who are telling them all of that and instilling those fears in them have absolutely no burden. They don't carry that same weight upon themselves. And I think this is the kind of thing why the religious nuns are becoming such a large category, because I think it's kind of getting old. I think people are starting to see, the consistent abuse of church leaders in so many denominations across Christianity.
And that's another place where I think that this really, really is newsworthy, because they talk about his history of just really, really pushing membership and pushing tithing, and a lot of the quotes that came from congregants were that he was always pushing for that 10%, donate, donate, donate. And so it was really all about the money and all about growing the church. And so that is where I really think that to me, this is like a clear-cut case of being swindled. Like, these people are being swindled, right? And you can put it under the blanket of religious belief and say, well, I'm allowed to because it's a religious institution and we're allowed to do this. But there's got to be some oversight that catches these sort of contradictory behaviors and holds those people responsible. Because in any other context, this is a manipulation and swindling. It's completely illegal. In the context of, oh, but he's a church leader, now suddenly it's okay. And then I can't remember who said it earlier. I think it was Richard Gilliver. Was like, there's already a built-in defense system where it's like, well, even Christians sin and we all make mistakes, even the leaders, and none of us are blameless. None of us are perfect, And so it's almost got this built-in self-defense system where you can't now come after it and say, no, this guy all along, he's swindling people out of their money, and this needs to be stopped and shut down, and he needs to be punished for that. Like, screw the affair part. Like, that's bad enough as it is. Don't get me wrong, but this is financially, it's a lot more than that. Like, he should be held responsible for that. And that umbrella of religion really protects a lot of people like him. And this is a good example of that.
Yeah, definitely. And it highlights, it's another case, I was going to say, because saying it highlights makes it sound like an isolated incident. It's another incident that highlights the fact that, maybe churches should be held up to scrutiny of the finances and where that money's going to, and not just hide behind the kind of shield of charity to be able to not have to declare that. I think it's important for, especially as a parishioner, someone who goes to this church, someone who's spending their hard-earned money to kind of sustain these things, these churches, that they have that the right and the ability to see where that money is going to, to see how much of it is going to growing the church, which you could argue isn't like misspending if it's actually
Right.
growing the church, but also to see how much of it is going into the pastor's private kind of financial gain and the charity work. There's nothing wrong. I don't see why anyone who is honest and above board would object to having the finances scrutinized like that.
Yeah, I honestly kind of think that churches should be more scrutinized than other. If you're saying I have the holy high ground and I have the truth and the morals and the way, A, what do you have to hide? But B, shouldn't a claim like that require a little bit more scrutiny? Like rather than being um exempt from financial scrutiny, shouldn't they be scrutinized even more so? Because that is definitely a tactic in which people can use to take advantage of other people easily, and we've seen it done time and time and time again. So that pretty much sums up the article, but I wanted to give you guys a quick second for any closing thoughts if anybody has any. Was there anything else you guys wanted to add before we move on?
Yeah, for me, it's the real sad case of this story is those who've, as I mentioned earlier, who've left the church and have not taken the opportunity to question their own beliefs or own faith.
Yeah.
You know, it was a perfect opportunity that arose where they could apply skepticism, but instead they've just gone for like self-blame and finger pointing. And that to me is sad, to miss that opportunity to, you know, they've blamed Pastor Smith, but the culprit in all of this is religion itself. That's the underlying thing that's made this possible.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well said.
I agree.
Yeah. So, between segments, I just want to take a second to thank everybody for your viewership and for helping to get the word out there and all your shares and likes and subscribes. We are now more than 10,000 subscribers and growing. So, thank you to both our veteran subscribers and welcome to all you new subscribers. This is a really, really big milestone as we're now able to do fundraisers. So, if you're watching us now and you haven't subscribed yet, you can definitely help us by subscribing. And other ways you guys can help is by sharing the link with your friends, family members, just anyone. Put it on Facebook, social media. Let's continue to get the word out there so we can continue to grow. Once you have subscribed, don't forget to hit that like button and set your notification bell to on. That way you're always notified when a new Nonprofits episode premieres, which is every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Time. And as you are aware, the Atheist Community of Austin has another YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen it yet, check out the Atheist Experience Network. That's AEN. It's a channel where we've put together all of the shows all in one place in a podcast form. So you can subscribe at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. And you can listen to the episodes of the Nonprofits, Atheist Experience, Secular Sexuality, pretty much any show that Atheist Community of Austin has done, they'll have it there. So you don't miss a single episode. All right. So we are going to move on to segment 2, which is a looking back.
Looking back.
Can't help but dance to that. This is an article from Newsweek, February 1st, 2022, in which we are told that Pastor Greg Locke of Global Vision Bible Church announced a book burning. In his sights for the fiery pit are such items as that Harry Potter books, Twilight books, Ouija boards, tarot cards, healing crystals, idol statues, spell books, and other witchcraft-related items. On Facebook, he expanded by calling the event a continued series on deliverance from demons and stated, "If you think we are crazy, then scroll on. We're exposing the kingdom of darkness for what it is. It's time for people to be delivered. Don't think you're crazy. You are, however, wrong." He also stated that he won't compromise with devil worshippers, seemingly forgetting that the devil is part of his own mythology and has very little, if anything at all, to do with any of the items he's burning. Locke has previously stated that we can't unsee the miracles that are happening around us. I'd like to ask him if there is any chance we could see said miracles first, as unseeing something that hasn't happened is pretty hard to do. And if creating his own little narrative about perfectly innocent items, maybe not Twilight, that's awful, isn't enough, Locke has also, according to the article, pushed COVID-19 misinformation and previously branded the pandemic as fake. He's also discouraged his supporters from getting inoculated against the virus during his sermons. So, pretty much an all-round tit. What are your thoughts on it, guys?
All right. Erin, would you like to start us
Okay. My first impression of this, it might come as a shock to a lot of people, but I had my first introduction to burning literature was in the 90s when I went to Christian church camp. So we also burned the things. We burned Harry Potter and the Ouija boards or whatever you may have brought to camp that had the demonic spirits in it. I have very distinct memories of standing outside that bonfire, looking over at the fires in anticipation of colorful spirits to actually come rising up out of the flames. So part of me feels like this is crazy, but a lot of me has compassion for the fact that I actually believe those things. And I think that some people, I know that a lot of people in Locke's congregation do actually believe that there are things in this world that can attach themselves to material items and have influence over your life. However, I think that this demonstration of his does not a lot of good in his own community or on people looking from the outside at this. I think that if we were to break down some of the parameters of the bite model, we might see some areas where this would fall into some culty behaviors. The first ones that came to my mind were behavior control and information control. Obviously, doing something like this is a demonstration in behavior. Having people participate in an event like this can do a lot for stoking the fears of congregants, increasing the intensity and fanaticism of the people that are attending this. It can also bring almost like a group, well, it does bring this kind of in-group closer and causes a bigger rift between us versus them. Information control, which is the I in the bite model, obviously it's information control. They're putting a line in the sand of what information is okay for them to see and what ones are deemed unacceptable and need to be destroyed. I think it's pretty extreme, but I mean, this isn't anything new for Greg Locke. I think that it's a continued expression of his to push against the nerves of people and against the sensibilities of the general public to try to get that pushback that he's looking for so that he can claim persecution. So that's my initial response when I saw that. I said, okay, so he's going to act this way and then he's going to respond in, shock when people think that it's bizarre what he's doing.
Yeah, that's so poignant because I feel like kind of similar to the first article, my first response to this was honestly kind of banal. Like, it's definitely not good. I don't think that he's doing this for the reasons you pointed out, that he's burning specifically objects to control the perception of the parishioners about like what information is acceptable and all that. But like in and of itself, I don't know if I really care that much. Like, if you want to have a bonfire and you're gonna chuck random shit in it, like, be my guest. It's not my bonfire. But like, I think that's a really good point, that the reason Greg Locke specifically does this is because he wants to get under the skin of the general public and be like, ooh, I'm burning these things that are so popular that everyone holds dear. And he really just wants to do it to piss people off. It doesn't seem like it really actually has that much basis in like, I last time I remember reading the Bible, I don't remember there being any things about burning the demons out of your books, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah,
well, and I don't think it's just about the outside, which I do agree with you guys both. I totally agree that it is to fire people up, but I think it's also to fire the congregants up in the other direction, right? It's really to get people really to feel galvanized against the outsiders and galvanized against these books and these concepts and these ideas. Because I don't know if it, like, there's this thing with group psychology where if you add that emotion in and get everyone really hyped up, they'll start to really believe stuff and get emotional towards stuff that otherwise would be really ridiculous. Like if he just sat down calmly and said, "Now nobody read Harry Potter," you'd have the same thing that happened with Dan Brown, where people were told not to read the what is it called, Angels and Demons or whatever, that book. Um, Christian sales skyrocketed because pastors were telling them not to read it, right? Um, so the best way to get parishioners to really galvanize on your side is to do these like big extravagant things that cause a lot of emotion. And so I think that it's pretty ridiculously brilliant. Like I think it's stupid because they have to buy the books in order to burn them. So I mean that the companies and the people are certainly not suffering having a few copies of their books or games burned, and it's free advertising for them when it becomes newsworthy. So they're not hurting anybody. It's pretty asinine, but I do think it's very effective toward like what Erin was saying, toward building a greater divide and setting up a stronger us versus them scenario.
Yeah, it made me laugh when I first saw the article because, and I understand what Erin is saying about it being like for the people involved in this. This is real. These things are real. But I've never been involved in it, and I'm from the outside completely, and especially now when we're like in 2022. And this is something that you'd have expected. I was around during the satanic panic when like people were burning records the first time round. And this is just like, it's really, you're still doing this kind of thing. You still think it has an effect all these years later. And so it's kind of comedic in a way that is doing something so like pointless. But it is kind of a reflection of a more important thing, and that's cultural objects being destroyed. Like important cultural objects, and I'm not for. I made the Twilight joke earlier. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that these things aren't culturally important, because of course things like the Harry Potter books, they've had a real cultural impact. But when you look back at the kind of historical artifacts that have been destroyed as well from religious groups, that's, it's a smaller, more comedy version of that. But by the same token, it is a reflection of that. And there are items that are thousands of years old that have been destroyed that have real cultural and historical significance.
Yeah. In fact, the other 2 articles. Oh, go ahead, Arden.
No, go ahead. You're rolling. Keep it up.
Okay, so the other 2 articles do discuss that. They talk about the artifacts and the sites that ISIS destroyed. And I think that that's a really, really important point to make, is that this might seem really sort of almost comical or asinine, and it's not really doing anything. And yeah, they had to buy the books, and so it's not really a big deal. But it kind of is, because we're talking about the symbolic destruction of a piece of culture or history that this specific group doesn't agree with or doesn't like. And when you talk about their followers or what impact it has on other people, you're talking about information control. So we're going to destroy the information that we think is bad. And even though these people, in the case of Locke, these people still have access to other versions of the book. So they're online, like they're not going away or going anywhere. But it does control their perception of those books and how they're going to approach them. Now you have ISIS destroying stuff. When it's gone, it's gone. It's never coming back. And so now you're talking about taking pieces of history and taking pieces of culture that a specific group doesn't like and destroying it for the purposes of controlling the narrative to their supporters, right? And perhaps even pissing off the outsiders, like kind of riling things up a little bit.
Yeah, I think kind of comparing it to like the more extreme versions of like what ISIS done is an interesting comparison. And I think it kind of builds on like the first article and just showing how like leaders, especially of a religious type and often usually men, seem to really have just consistently found ways of galvanizing their own audiences, and as we've said many times there already, like, and alienating outsiders. And although I don't particularly respect Greg Locke as a intellectual, I will say that he's good at what he does. I mean, he's got, a lot of media attention for these kind of stunts that he seems to pull with a certain degree of regularity. And his I don't know anything about his church attendance, if it's gone up or down with the rise of his like media attention, but there's still people showing up. I mean, there was a video attached in the article of somebody in the congregation while he was saying this, and it looked like a full audience, at least from the person who had the camera on forward. So it's shocking sometimes how many people are willing to hop on that train, but there they are. So, and right in our backyards, in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost scary. And when you talk about in-group, out-group, the out-group, like in our case, anybody, even including Christians who don't agree with the book burning, there's no win, right? Because maybe other than to just completely ignore them and make it not newsworthy whatsoever, to just like, they have their burning, they all whoop and holler and cast out demons, and they all go back to their houses. That's probably the only way to really minimize this. But
That's what I
any
was thinking too.
response, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what do we
like
do
any
here
response is going
as
to fuel this
onlookers?
behavior.
Like, it's
Yeah.
good to point out, like, this is what's happening. This is some of the psychological things that could be going on as a group. But ultimately, like, he just seems like he's a raging narcissist, and he just, like, if everybody just turned a blind eye to what he does, would he be interesting anymore? I don't know. But we also, like, I think ideally we would like to get people out of his cult, and continue to comment on these things, just for the off chance that somebody from his congregation watches it and it sparks a little curiosity, like, what the hell am I doing burning all these books, or what? This is a little bit crazy. I was thinking about that too, in that, like, there's got to be a couple people in that crowd who senses the insanity of some of the stuff that's going on. Like, I hope that if he's going to continue to make these demonstrations to make a big fuss over things and get everybody's reaction, like, I hope that there are people in his audience that start to kind of, question how normal is this. I do have a feeling that, as kind of we've come back to many times, that there is this element of control. And I'm thinking about, like, somebody who's at his congregation, goes to work on Tuesday, and they're like, what'd you do on the weekend? Oh, we had a bonfire. We burned all these books. Somebody from their office might be like, well, that's kind of strange. That's a strange thing to do. I'm wondering how deep the indoctrination goes, that they're going to be expecting that pushback, and that's going to cause either a confirmation bias, or it's going to make them uncomfortable and cause the dissonance. It's just kind of like, who knows? We'll have to kind of see how that plays out. But yeah.
Yeah, I think making people feel uncomfortable is not in a kind of aggressive way. Is the way to go with this, because there was a guy who protested this by burning the Bible and shouting "Hail Satan." I don't think that's the way to go. I think pointing out that, burning something because your best invisible friend in the sky is going to give you special cuddles as a reward, it's a ridiculous thing to do, and it just makes you look silly at the end of the day. And I think going down that route is kind of more effective than getting all aggressive and kind of doing counter burnings. Because if you're going to sit there and burn the Bible in response, all they're going to do is say, look, these people are aggressive. They've got, we're right all along. If you just point out how silly they look, and as ex-Christian Erin said, when you go to work and somebody's, somebody points that out to you, it can kickstart that thinking process.
Yeah. If I could share, like, a quick anecdote about that, like, as somebody who was part of a charismatic evangelical missionary group for a while, one of the biggest things that caused me dissonance was when I was confronted with apathy about what I was trying to share. Because you're taught from a very young age that your message is like this, this big deal, and that you're going to cause people to push against you or fall away, or they're going to come to Jesus and all this. And when you go out there and you act like this, when people meet you with apathy, like, they're like, what are you on about? Like, that is dissonance causing in itself. So I don't know, maybe that will be my approach if I run into people like that, to just be like, what's the big deal? Like, what are you so worried about? Like, it does have an effect in that way.
No, I do love that in the case of the book burning. Maybe not so much in the case of like destroying the artifacts and
No.
the sites. Like I think
I'm
there we
talking
should,
just one-on-one cycle, like the
yeah,
personal things that
absolutely.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there's like sort of a level of this is done to get attention, so let's not give them the attention. And oh, this is actually destructive and harmful. Let's stop this behavior. And I think that there's a line there that can be drawn. And yeah, I definitely think that while both can be dangerous, one has a more lasting impact than the other for sure. We are going to be moving on to segment 3, but let's take a little break in our conversation. That way, if you didn't tune into the other ACA shows last week, here is what you missed.
People need to be comfortable with the idea that humans have been for a long time. We like to do it, generally speaking, and people should be allowed to engage in that to what extent they do or don't want to.
A bit of wisdom? Oh, just have a cup of tea and chill out. That's it. Just chill out. Look at a picture of a duck. Everything's all right. It's all good.
Imagine if we were still celebrating based on Roman pagan practices. Like, can you imagine what Valentine's Day would look like today? Right? And
Awesome is what it would be.
That would
Yeah, I
be.
mean, like as a sex therapist, I would be out of work.
You know, here's a Bible verse for your tip. Take your Bible verse and shove it up your. I need money. You know, my student loans aren't going to get paid by, you know, citations to Corinthians.
If you can predict 500 things correctly, but you predict one thing blatantly incorrectly, while claiming that everything you say is inspired by the Almighty Allah, then I cannot trust you.
That's too good. Okay, so we are moving on to segment 3, church and state separation. Arden, take it away.
Yeah, so this next article comes to us from Only Sky Media and was written by a friend of the show, Hemant Mehta, with regard to a bill that was recently filed in Oklahoma. This is Senate Bill 1470. It was filed by Senator Rob Standridge. Basically would enable parents of students in public education to hold liable teachers that would, quote, promote positions in the classroom or at any function of the public school that is in opposition to closely held religious beliefs of students. And that would be for damages of at a minimum of $10,000 per incident per individual. And while this could, and Hemant points it out, be used in opposition of like evolution or sorry, got confused. This could be used in opposition of evolution or other basic science concepts, but I think we all kind of are getting the sense that this is also potentially going to be used as a bludgeon against teachers who might teach any concepts regarding like LGBTQ rights or like the fact that queer people exist generally. And I think it also kind of seems based on just like the verbiage of the bill that it would be difficult to get this to pass in general. But like, to be honest, if you've been following the legislative sessions that have been going across the country, like there are tons of anti-science, anti-trans propaganda-based bills that have been passed. There was one passed in Oklahoma already this year. And I don't know, it doesn't really seem like that much of a stretch to me that a bill like this could get through. Like it seems to me that these groups and these legislators keep swinging, you know, they want to keep finding a way to phrase a bill with just the right verbiage that it can slip through any loopholes that might exist, separating religion and government. And that I think that's really scary. And that's, at least for me, why I love getting to show up here and do stuff with the ACA, because I think that's really the core of this, of like the mission, right? Is focusing on these areas where the separation between religion and government are dissolving. And yeah, so that's kind of like the quick summary. So what do y'all think?
Okay, so I think honestly,
lots.
Yeah. Oh,
Go on.
good. Okay, we're gonna have a lot of good discussion on this. Yeah. I think the wording is problematic, especially because I don't think they actually understand when they carry that out to its actual conclusions what it really means. Because they don't really mean any religious belief. They mean a
Right.
Christian religious belief, and that's pretty well established. Because if you start talking about any religious belief, you pretty much can't teach anything in the classroom, including creation science. Right? So, because that's going to offend somebody else's religious beliefs. So yeah, it's very problematic and vague, but it is clearly skewed towards the Christian religious faith. But what do you guys think?
I think this story for me, and I want to push back a little bit against Arden, because I think, and this is probably me being incorrect because I'm from outside America, but to me this article, I'm not going to lie, just I thought it was satire when I first read it, because it's just like outside of America, this is just something that would just be laughed away. It's and I find it so amazing. I mean, I've talked a lot about the Texas School Board and their attempts to push creationism in. And I think this has overtaken that as my favorite attempts from Christianity to kind of manipulate America. It just seems a little bit ludicrous that somebody's would go to these lengths, especially piggybacking on what Laura said, because it's so obviously something that could be turned around and used against them. Because the minute somebody turns around and starts teaching Christianity in class, and there's a little Muslim kid sat there, they can say, hang on, that offends my closely held religious beliefs.
$10,000, please.
Yeah, it seems very poorly thought out in that way. That's what I was thinking too. Like the wording of it too. Like anything that contradicts or opposes anything in opposition to closely held religious beliefs. How are they going to measure this? How are they going to go about this? Like to do with multiple. I mean, obviously, in a pluralistic group, there's going to be lots of different kinds of beliefs there, but how do you measure whether it was a deeply held belief? And what if the person's just a casual Muslim or whatever it is? Like, this is like the most bonkers claim, or bill that they're trying to put forward here. And also, like, the victims in this, if it were to go through, it's obviously the teachers, for one thing, like having to put that pressure on teachers to try to manage that. That seems like a ridiculous thing to try to have the teachers to do. Or I think it was like the compensation, or sorry, the charge would come, it has to be out of the personal pocket of the offender, I believe. So if there's any GoFunding, so say somebody were to say something, heaven forbid, that opposes someone's deeply held belief, the offender would have to pay for the bill up to $10,000 out of their pocket, and they can't do any kind of GoFund. Like, the absurdity of all of it just is like, it's brutal. And they, like what Arden had said, like the ability, or like the people that could be affected the most deeply are the people who are part of the LGBTQIA community. There's going to be people, if this were to, I'm just hypothetically saying that if this were to be passed, teachers, students, anybody in that community, it's going to cause, it could further isolate, further deny their existence, further harm. Where is that coming in the conversation? Like, that's probably the quickest thing to jump to of the people who are going to be harmed if this were to pass through.
Yeah.
Not the people with deeply held beliefs. I'm sorry. You don't get harmed when somebody says, I think evolution is true.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think that's exactly it, right? Like, I highly doubt that this bill would be used to target some, like, that kind of situation. This would be used to target marginalized people. And I'm sure they'd find a way to shoehorn critical race theory into a, offense my deeply held religious belief or something. But I don't know. Well, I definitely agree that it's ridiculous and satirical. I think we're really deeply underestimating the potential for the religious right, this Christian nationalist movement that's really swelling up in the U.S. To affect change, because between the abortion bills in Texas and all of this anti-LGBTQ discrimination that's being attempted to be legislated across states, it really is prevalent. And when you're looking at the midterms coming up, right, one of the things that they consider a significant predictor for like how we can expect an election to go is the generic congressional ballot polls. And right now there's like a big sum of all of them, and they're all pretty much pointing towards Republicans having a pretty significant win in this coming election, which is scary. I think people should really be like afraid when they're seeing these bills even be drafted. Like, sure, it's probably not going to get passed, maybe in this session, but you know, if there's a landslide win in the midterms, like who's to say in 2 years at the beginning of the legislative session, a bill that's they identified, oh, this word, and that word were the reasons it didn't get passed because those weren't well defined or they were too ambiguous. They could just structure the bill and attempt it again. So like, I really want this sort of story, at least for the audience, to take away with like a sense of urgency about how important your vote is. I so empathize with people who are like frustrated with the system, right? Like, I totally get not feeling represented by Biden if you're like a marginalized person and being like, oh, like what's the difference? Like my life sucks either way. Like people are still legislating against me either way. But it can get worse. It can get much, 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 much worse. And while it's not as sexy as the big federal elections, these local elections are how people like this man get elected. Like this is a state election that got him into his seat of power, you know? So I think people really need to pay attention, do their research. You might have primaries coming up in your state in like a month. Like look up who is running and what their policies are. Think about this stuff because while it might not impact you, that could have seriously huge impacts for people you know and people you care about. And if the wall between religion and government is dissolved more, like who's to say what could happen? I mean, there was a attempted, insurrection on our Capitol not that long ago by a group full of Christian nationalists. Like this should strike fear into the hearts of people and should get you out to the polls. So that I don't know. That's kind of my angle with this. I think I realize it can feel like there's nothing I can do when I'm hearing a story, but like with regard to elected officials, there is absolutely something you can do. So that's my
absolutely.
That's my
Not
go
to mention
vote
other
thing.
ways you can get active. Yeah, no, I love that message. Like this article actually scared me and was more concerning to me than all the other articles. This was the one that I thought was the most telling of what our political and religious atmosphere is like today. Because you're right, it's probably not going to pass right away. It's a multi-pronged approach by religious people to pass multiple laws in multiple states that limit public schools' ability to teach information versus religion, right? And so this sets a scary precedence if you think about it, of what can and cannot be taught. And I think honestly, like you guys had talked about who could be harmed most by this bill, and I agree that the LGBT community is very under attack here in this bill too. But teachers in general having to tiptoe and be freaked out and scared of what they can and can't teach, or worried that if they happen to teach something that's factual, that they will be charged money because of somebody else's belief system. Like that's pretty frightening. And the fact that this is even being attempted really speaks to the atmosphere that's going on right now and how under attack our public school system is, which I think is interesting because they'll talk about Christianity as being under attack and how they're persecuted and how Christians aren't safe to be Christians, and yet they're threatening everybody else for just here's what science says and here's what we can determine is true. Oh, you're attacking my belief system, right? So it's a little bit it's a ginormous contradiction, and it's very frightening.
Yeah, and regarding my wife's a teacher, and that was one of the things that sprang out to me, like the kind of enormous pressure that it would put teachers under, and the bill said that like it's not just a case that they'd be charged $10,000; it's a minimum of $10,000 per incident per individual, and that's just like that must be overwhelming if you're a teacher, especially if you're a teacher of something that these kind of people oppose, that like these kinds of people, that religious people might find like does offend their things like evolution. And that's, you've got to be thinking as a teacher, this frightens me. And as much as I think from an outside perspective it is kind of satirical, I totally take on Arden's point that the real danger in this is that it's been suggested, and if it's rejected, it will be taken away and reworked, because we've seen that time and time again with the Texas School Board. I know this is Oklahoma, but with the Texas School Board, that is exactly their tactic. They submit it when it doesn't work. They resubmit it with a slightly amended wording. So that is the real danger of this.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I know there's a delay, so sometimes we can talk over each other.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, but I think Erin started first, so I want to give her an opportunity to speak.
I just wanted to reiterate from both Richard and Arden and Laura, but like I'm also not American, but if I've learned anything over the last few years is that we shouldn't take any of this lightly, because I think that the Christian nationalists that are grouping together and making these things happen, they are not joking around. And I think that to not take it seriously and to not cause it to stir up your own activism to try to get out there and affect your local government, like we need to take it seriously, even if it sounds really stupid to us.
Yeah, not to mention how things spread from one country to another, right? Like some of the hard Christian nationalism that we were hearing in America, we're now hearing all the way up in Canada as well.
Hey,
like, so it spreads.
We had QAnoners in Ottawa for the last week and a half. It's
honking their horns and pooping on things.
It's not just an American problem. Definitely, it's something that I care very deeply about. Not just because I have so many friends in America, in the US, because it does trickle down and affect everybody that has any kind of relationship with the United States. So, we just need to take it seriously.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is that it's not just the Christian nationalism that's spreading, because in Britain, I can see Muslims being the one to implement something like this, because they're the ones who kind of will push for laws to change to like favor them. And we've already had incidents in Britain where teachers have had protests outside schools and been hounded out for comments they've made about, not nasty comments, just general comments they've made that Muslim people have found offensive. And that's been a thing. So it's not just a Christian problem. This is again, as we said in the last article, this is a problem with religion and that kind of sense of privilege they have, and the idea that you can't offend us. You can't offend us. We're allowed to criticize you, but you're not allowed to criticize us.
And we're allowed to control what we learn, but we're also allowed to control what you learn and what is taught in general.
Right. I think that's one thing that I find the most like offensive. Like I'm a very, very left-leaning person, but I definitely have a pretty deep libertarian like sense of myself. Like I like to say, like, generally speaking, if you're not hurting anybody, like, you do you, man. I'm not going to sit here and police everybody's actions all the time. That's exhausting to me. But like this is where I draw the line, you know, like as a trans person, I am not trying to like transition you. I'm trying to live my life, and I'm trying to defend the right of other kids who I grew up in the public school system in a very religious environment. I remember what it was like. I want kids to not have to endure that sort of thing again. And what these sort of laws are attempting to do is not just like make it so you can't talk about it. They want to push things in the complete opposite direction. They want to almost, we were talking about the cultic information control in the last article, that they almost seem to want to have that happen on like a grand scale within the country.
Absolutely.
Which is horrifying. It's absolutely like disturbing to think of how many people in America would be affected by that. And it's sometimes even scarier to think of how apathetic people are towards this kind of information. Like a lot of people seem to think it's like, oh, there's just these religious nut jobs. Like they're in the, they're there, but like nobody actually takes them seriously. And people take them seriously. It's a big movement. Like Donald Trump got a lot of votes in the most recent US presidential election. Like if that doesn't scare the living shit out of you, I don't know what else to do for you. Like turn this scenario into like a horror flick or something. Maybe that'll get people motivated. I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I think you might be muted.
Sorry about that. My chair is squeaky, so I muted. But it really seems like all of these 3 articles have an overarching theme of control, right? You have the first one where the guy is talking about control over his congregation, and you need to tithe, and you need to bring people in, and kind of like really controlling the prosperity gospel. And then you have the book burning and destroying of artifacts. And now here you have people trying to control what's in the public school. And it really seems to me to be strong messages of indoctrination and control. And so as we move into our last segment, we're going to talk about a little bit of relinquishing that control, right? So our last segment, we have Chritian College faces backlash for trying to do exactly that. So it was City Point Christian College in Australia was requiring that their students sign a contract. It was like a behavioral contract. It was very, very anti-LGBTQ. And they have since retracted that contract and say, I quote from the principal, "We deeply regret that some students feel that they would be discriminated against because of their sexuality or gender identity. And I apologize to them and their families on behalf of the college." Sort of as though it was a bit of a whoopsie. But this retraction came from pressure from the minister of education. So it came from the government telling the school that they need to cut this crap out. But in good news, this is where I kind of want to draw as much positive out of this as possible. This is kind of a win where we have a bad behavior by a religious college that's being reversed, and they're being more or less forced, but they're putting it out there that no, you could be anyone, anywhere. Doesn't matter your gender identity, doesn't matter your sexuality, you're welcome. And I'd say whether forced or not, it's a culture change and it's positive. So moving from these 3 examples of terrible behavior, still terrible behavior, but it's being reversed. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Good news, bad news, indifferent?
I think it's a mixed bag. It's absolutely amazing that this pressure has got the college to U-turn. That, as Laura said, that is a step in the right direction. Oh, if only Cynthia was here to sing it. That and it is, and there's no arguing against that. It's an amazing victory. I think the other side of the coin is that it's absolutely ridiculous that we live in a world where that amount of pleasure needs to be applied in the first place when it comes to something like this. And that's the scary thing. That, why is that even allowed to begin with? Why is this letter, this change in contract, allowed to be sent out even to begin with?
Yeah, I found the whole thing kind of gross and ironic because, the religious right is constantly telling LGBT people that we're these like sex crazed perverts and we're like all disgusting and degenerates. But meanwhile, this grown ass man has sent out a letter being like, I need to make sure that your children's sexuality is a certain kind of way. And I'm like, which one of us is the one that's concerned with the sexuality of minors here? Like, because it's not the LGBT people. We're trying to tell you to fuck off and leave us alone, But I really think this is actually a good thing. Like, I know that there's like a lot of fear, I think, from maybe people who aren't religious, but are more like libertarian in the US, of like the notion of like the federal government or a state government stepping in to like strong arm a religious organization or school is like really terrifying to some people. Like they think that's going to like shift us way over to where like nobody can be religious at all. But I think clearly, as this is shown, like we're not saying you can't be religious. We're not saying you can't have your Christian school. We're saying that like you can't control people's actions if they're from a protected status. And I think that's great, because why should these children who had no choice in being who they are have to like either lie or defend themselves against a school leader. Like, I don't know. If they don't even have the capacity to like maybe formulate like a logical argument about why this shouldn't be happening. That's when like we should have I think state bodies stepping in to take action.
Yeah, one thing I did like about this was the fact that a lot of the kind of kickback came from teachers, other Christians, and that really like that made me feel good that it wasn't just a case of like, you know, the conservative Christians being challenged by the liberal atheists. You know, it was they got kickback from their own quarter, because this was that disgusting a thing to send out.
Yeah, being called out from someone in or a group of people that are part of their in-group, I think that can have a lot more of a long-lasting effect as a cultural shift. Maybe, you know, like what you said, getting called like bigoted or you know discriminative from people outside of your community is just not going to cause a lot of character change in a people as much as it will from somebody who's in your own group. I think I'm on board with a lot of the other things that were said. I had a really hard time being charitable with this one. Like, as much as I'm glad that it got changed, I was pissed when I read this because first, like, they did it under without telling the parents. I think as a parent, that pissed me off. The fact that they were so interested in what is going on in children's underwear and in their personal lives is gross. I wonder how much of this is a actual regret or if it was just getting caught. And so now they're having to do this PR, you know, song and dance to try to make up for it. I really, really, really do hope that it does cause some long lasting change in the way it's, you know, the environment is at that church. I have a feeling that it didn't need to be in writing for this to have been a reality for a lot of kids who are going to that school. I think that getting it in black and white was a bad move on their part, but it called probably out something that was already very alive and well in their own community. So I don't know. I like I said, I had a hard time keeping my cool with this one. I felt like I'm really glad that someone stepped in, but shouldn't have happened.
I think it's also like I love that y'all are pointing out how cool it is that the like community was stepping up, or that like teachers and so forth, like people that the kids might actually know, because I think when we're talking about like the quality of life of LGBT people, like that their community members and the people they actually know are like one of the most significant validation from those people is one of the most significant factors in like impacting their quality of life. You know, that we love to talk about, or at least Christians love to be like, like the transgenders are mentally ill because they're all suicidal. But it's like the reason they're suicidal is because their parents and their community leaders and their teachers aren't standing up for them. So I think I hope that this can be something that these kids might like integrate long term into like their sense of self, that like, hey, this person in our community tried to do something to harm an entire group of people, and like somebody had my back, you know. That's going to create kids who are like confident and self-assured and know that like, when somebody treats me like that, that's not okay. I deserve better than that. I think that's awesome.
I hope that is the message that the kids get out of this.
Yeah, the harm was real as well. And in this letter, that I mean, the contract from the school sent out, the wording in it was that any form of sexual immorality, including but not limited to adultery, fornication, homosexual acts, bisexual acts, bestiality, incest, and pedophilia and pornography is sinful and offensive to God, and it's destructive to human relationships and society. You don't link those fucking things together. This made me so angry reading this. It's just like, they're not connected. Then why are you connecting these dots that aren't there?
Because they want to make it as dirty as possible, and like just to really highlight just how quote unquote wrong these acts are, which is really, it's a disgusting practice. It really is. And the fact that they were given a deadline that they had to sign this form. This wasn't like a if you want to, or we're doing a survey, which would still be pretty disgusting, but it was mandatory. And it also forced children to mark their gender as was stated on their birth certificate, right? Which can be really, really difficult for children who are transitioning or even questioning, like to make it
Or
mandatory that it match their birth certificate is
yeah,
is
or
really
people
shocking.
yes, or people who are born biologically intersex. Like what are they supposed to do? You're going to be forcing this information when it was absolutely none of your fucking business. For parents, sorry, for people to get that on the contract. It made me so mad.
Yeah, I think the worst part is that like this would have, I think they even cited somebody saying that her son or her brother, I think it was, would have maybe not been able to finish school. He was so close to graduating, and if this would have been pushed through, he wouldn't have been able to graduate. Like, how absurd. You're so preoccupied with as you said, Erin, like what's in this kid's underpants, or like what they might do in their personal lives, that you're gonna like deny them an education. Like that's doesn't seem like a very, and using this loosely, it doesn't seem like a very Christian thing to do. And I also just have to laugh because bisexuals are like constantly like not considered in anything, and the fact that there was homosexual and bisexual acts there.
Bisexuals are good.
That's
Good.
almost a form of progress in its own sick way.
Yeah,
no, it's because there's just like lack of total understanding and like there's so much ignorance in the whole thing. It's self-owned in so many ways because of the wording. They just completely admitted to their own ignorance in the human sexuality and gender. Like they just don't understand because they can't even write up a discrimination contract, like a discriminating contract, to get their point across without looking stupid.
Yeah.
So I kind of think of this, and I want to get your guys' opinion on this. I kind of think of it as a win and not a win, because on the one hand, there's this really like old-fashioned, we need to do this purity culture contract with our students that just seems so bass-ackwards, and that to me doesn't seem like a win at all. And the fact that they were forced not to do it by the Minister of Education. So I see it as a win in the sense that they had to retract it. But at the same time, this crap is still happening, so I kind of see it also as not. What do you guys think? Richard, what do you think?
That is exactly what the word you used there hit the nail on the head. They had to retract it. Mm-hmm. This wasn't a case of this was pointed out to them and they thought, actually, yes, we may be wrong. This is just a case of the fact that shit, we've been caught out. We need to step back and retract it so we come out of this looking good. The school agreed with the backlash, and that had nothing, Your Honour, at all to do with the Change.org petition that had more than 150,000 signatures, or the Queensland Human Rights Commission, who said expelling, disciplining, or otherwise treating a student unfavourably because of these characteristics is unlawful discrimination in Queensland. That had nothing to do with it at all. Nothing at all as to why they changed their mind. Of course it did. It's ridiculous. It's blatantly a case of the being caught out, the trying to save as much face as possible in light of that.
Well, I do get what you all are saying with like it's frustrating this even has to happen in the first place. Personally, I think it's a good thing, because I know for like me and other trans activists, something that we always talk about is just protections on the books, federal protections from the government on the books. That's what I want. It doesn't have to be like, you also have to like give me a kiss on the cheek every Wednesday or anything special. Just like, you can't discriminate against trans people or on the basis of their gender identity. And like when we're like looking back on history, like I think these kinds of laws and these kinds of situations ultimately impact the culture in the long term, right? Like if there weren't laws that said specifically you cannot discriminate against someone over their race, and it was just like, oh well, like it's sad that we have to have this in the first place. Like, why do we even like want this? Like, you should just accept people on the basis of their race. Like, point. There would still be people who were like, well, I don't care what you think I should do. They would still be discriminating. Like, I think the forcing people to not discriminate against people over something they can't control will ultimately, in the long run, push culture in a direction that will cause people to fall into the camp that we're all in now about this,
That's such a good point. Like, these things are frustrating, but the fact that they're trying to, get these things in and they come down to writing, and then they can be properly pushed back against, it at least takes it out of the darkness. Like, it's brought into light and it can be properly scrutinized. So as frustrating as it is, like it is a good thing that they're I guess trying to do it. And then if we can keep pushing back against it and not letting them get away with it, that is how you move forward.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I think that is where the win is. Maybe not necessarily in the school's decisions, since they made the decision to do that form in the first place. But you're right. In the minds of the administrators and the Ministry of Education and the people who pushed back, this is a big win in the sense that they were held responsible for that behavior. Yeah. So I love the way you put that, Arden. That's really well said.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people, who like that. Well, maybe they have like they will say like their Christianity is what influences their morals or something. I think there are a lot of people who they're kind of where they start and end thinking about morality is like, what am I allowed to do? Legally. Like there. How many people have been like against like marijuana before it started getting legalized in a bunch of states? Like they were like, oh well, it's legal and so it's bad, and it's. I think. Well, it's unfortunate. That is just the extent of what some people think, and that's why I think these laws are good, because it kind of nudges people to catch up to like what we've seen is like a maybe what we can argue logically is like the right moral position to come to.
Yeah, and to piggyback on you, Arden, there with morals, from the point of view of Christianity in itself, this really does show how polarized Christianity is, how much of a contradiction it is. Because on the one hand, you've got people like, in the Old Testament, we're told it's perfectly fine to take virgin girls as spoils of war, or if God chooses to do so, he can wipe out the entirety of the earth. That's a morally good bit, and these people are obviously jumping on that. But on the other hand, and the good part of this story, this is other than the actual decision being overturned, this is the most amazing part of this story for me. Is you've got those Christian voices who are applying what they see as the love of Christianity and saying, I'm going to take a stand against this because this is wrong. One of the teachers has moved out of the school. She had her own child in the school, and she's actually moved out of the school, left her job and removed her child just because of the decision from the school to do this. And she cites her Christianity as the reason behind doing that.
Yeah, one thing this does also reflect on is how flexible Christianity happens to be as a religion. I mean, we have a lot of other big religions that have held on to a lot of their ancient teachings and sort of ancient traditions, and yet they're diminishing. They're more of a cultural religion now. They're not necessarily getting new membership from people outside that culture. But here you have Christianity that's spread all over the globe, and one thing that makes it very successful is how flexible it is. And that scares me. Don't get me wrong. Like that,
Yeah.
in a way, it's terrible because it continues to draw people in from different angles and like, oh, you suddenly don't like this. Okay, well, we're going to change this and we're going to approach it from this angle. And, we're totally accepting of these people, or, oh, no, yeah, we're totally okay with this practice or that practice. Even though, I mean, not even a decade ago, we weren't, right? And so in a way, it's good and bad, but it really demonstrates how flexible this specific religion is to take up whatever the cultural standard is and run with it. And what I do like about it is that as we get more aware of human rights and treating people kindly, now this loving religion that's supposed to be loving to people and accepting and Jesus loves you and all this other stuff, now they're actually kind of given the opportunity to live up to that claim, right? And this is one of those situations in which it benefits the people for the religion to change, because now the religion is going to do less harm to those people.
Yeah, I think I've said it a couple of times on this show before that while generally speaking, like my fantasy world existed, like Christianity would not be a thing anymore. But considering we live in the real world, I think a world where Christians are able to change and to develop their own like sense of morality, and where Christians can be LGBTQ affirming is definitely the future I want, because I think that's going to be how we even get to a future where the culture is broadly accepting generally, right? Is by allowing people to be like, okay, you're not quite all the way there, but like you're like 75% of the way, and that's better than you were 10 years ago. So like I'm going to be appreciative of that progress.
Yeah, that's pretty much Christianity in Britain. At the minute, we're very the Church of England is exceptionally kind of wishy-washy with its views and opinions, and will go where it thinks the voter numbers are, and with Britain being quite liberal, that's working in our favour because the church tends to back up those kind of decisions, which is as good as you said, not ideal. It would be better without that bad thinking to start with, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all the points being made. That it just, if we're looking at harm reduction, what is the next step here, and to continue to move people forward in a less harmful version if they can't quite let go of their own religious beliefs. I'm on board with encouraging my progressive Christian friends to keep being the people who push back against the fundamentalists, be those parents that push back within their own in-group. I think that's great. It's a step in the right direction.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so it is that we're going to end this show on a high note, which I always love doing. So that about wraps it up for today, but I do want to throw out some final announcements. If you do want to join our fan social media outlets, we have several of them. So you can find most of us nonprofits chitty-chatting on the atheist community of Discord on and off. So you can get there by going to tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And we are also quite active on Facebook. So you can catch us there at tiny.cc/FBNP. So Facebook nonprofit, FBNP. Also, there's several ways. If you want to support the show, you can do so by becoming a patron at tiny.cc/Patreon nonprofit, so a Patreon NP. And you can find yourself, if you're already shopping at Amazon, check out Amazon Smile, and you can support the atheist community of Austin by shopping smile.amazon.com and selecting Atheist Community of Austin as the beneficiary. Be sure to use that link as we get just a little bit off the top of that. So we really appreciate it. More so, we also value your feedback. So tell us what you like and didn't like in the comments. If you're active in chat, we really appreciate it. Stay active in chat and keeping the communication going throughout the show. But you can also email us at nonprofits@atheist-community.org. So before we go, though, I want to give you guys a chance to throw out any final thoughts.
Yeah, this has been an episode. I think someone mentioned it earlier. I don't remember who it was. With an arc to it. All these stories have been underscored by kind of religious abuse, and in some cases it's proven that we can overturn that. In other cases, we've got a lot more work to do. Let's keep working at that as best we can.
Co-signed.
Awesome. I love it. Erin, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are, it is sometimes easy to jump and feel outraged over these things, but that we need to take a moment and think about the people who are inside the systems and how they're being affected, and how can we move forward. How can we take these things seriously and make movements in our own local area to try to reduce harm going forward, and look for allies where you can who are willing to join forces with you, because sometimes they're where you at least expect them.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, great thoughts. Thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for the backstage crew for all the work that you guys do. And thank you to all you listeners for watching and participating in chat and everything. It has been fun. So thank you all for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242, or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.